I guess just like that, nature gives you one day of sunshine and says, nope, here's the rain for you again. I don't think this is gonna stop today too. It's raining pretty hard. All right, what did I read today? This was kind of interesting with that topic, I guess, with things, for example, drone regulations. You have one side saying it's fantastic. Some people think they should be doing more, whereas the other side, they would say it's ridiculous, it's over the top. It basically doesn't focus on safety. It just takes people's rights away. So it's kind of interesting reading this article here, which was actually confusing as well when you actually dive into it, because it's going with the narrative of there was this person who was really against things like the drone regulations here in Canada. Now all of a sudden they love it. So why is that? So as it says here, Abbotsford drone regulation naysayer now on board with new rules. Stephen Tam, originally outraged at the 2017 regulations, now says new rules led to more safety. Almost 4 years ago, Transport Canada clamped down on drone usage as they announced new regulations to address safety concerns related to the flying devices. The new rules included several no-fly zones, including within 9 kilometers of an airport, heliport or seaplanes, and within 75 meters of buildings, vehicles, animals, and people or crowds. That was completely ridiculous if everyone remembers that. That was back during the interim order times. It says they also limited the heights a user could fly and also restricted the times and circumstances they could be used. Disobeying the rules meant hefty fines, and back in 2017, none of this news sat well with Abbotsford resident Stephen Tam. At the time, he called the new rules outrageous and was disappointed with the way the new rules would take away from a family hobby. Keep that point in mind as we go on here. It says, fast forward to today, and Tam reached out to the news to explain how wrong he was 4 years ago and how the new restrictions have been a great thing for the drone community and safety. Really? It says here, quote, since that time, I am now a licensed advanced pilot, he told the news. I look back on my knee-jerk reaction and I am actually embarrassed. I was shocked to learn how recklessly people operated their drones, and I now support and encourage getting an education on how to properly use your drone. Tam said the misuse of drones and the dangerous operations of drones has gone down in recent years, with the regulations likely contributing to the fewer incidents. That's a key thing as we continue reading this, because here it implies they're just basically guessing, like maybe it helped, but at the same time, what are you basing these off of? What numbers? It just seems like they're just pulling anything out of thin air, so to speak. But it gets interesting as you read this. It says, the Abbotsford Police Department also has drone detection equipment and have used it in the past, including during the Abbotsford International Air Show. Footage posted to YouTube of a drone flying in close proximity to the Alex Fraser Bridge in November 2017 made headlines. And this summer, it was revealed that an RCMP drone collided with an RCMP helicopter near Houston, BC in February 2020. Okay, who else did not immediately see the weirdness of this article in mentioning these examples? I remember this one back in 2017, I even talked about it. It was those rotor riot guys or whatever, those people from the US. They decided for whatever reason, oh, let's do some FPV drone diving around the bridges here. I was like, why are you coming here in Canada to do it? Isn't there bridges and stuff in the US? And you know how on edge people are right now with the hysteria and all that with the drones. And people will probably be using it as an example. It's like, oh, this is why we need this and that. For that example too, I mentioned back then, what they did was stupid and selfish in my opinion. Was what they did dangerous in this context here? That's up for debate, because that actually relates to the other example they actually mentioned, the one with the RCMP crashing their drone into the helicopter, a real tangible one. So if you're talking about things like safety, this actually happened during these new regulations and all that. So if you think about it, it didn't help. If you're talking about like, oh, reduced incidents on that, I could argue it made it more dangerous. When did this ever happen? When these things weren't actually in place. This only happened when we had all this, oh, you should get training in this and this to make it sound like a huge airplane. In my opinion, it basically did nothing. It gives people a false sense of security, like the RCMP, that, oh, now that you took this, I don't know, $500 course, you can fly a drone now. Clearly that's not the case here, because they're the ones that crashed into a huge helicopter around a bunch of people. Tam said the new regulations forced him to get the proper licensing required to fly locally, and he currently has an advanced level drone operator's license from Transport Canada. He said the basic course takes about 3 days and is relatively inexpensive. Users must be at least 14 years old to get the basic license and 16 years old for an advance. All drones must also be registered, with those using unregistered drones opening themselves up to fines. TAM and other advanced license holders can operate in controlled airspaces, but they must ask NAV Canada for authorization. That's not entirely true. I mean, technically people could fly things like a sub 250 drone. That's what a lot of people actually have been doing because they don't want to go through all this bureaucracy and all that. They just want to fly. So that's what they've done. Basically use the lower weight threshold in terms of flying a drone. Which brings up my point again, this whole thing, it's all revolved around things like, for example, like a DJI drone. I mean, you start talking about things that this regulates, for example, let's say like a model aircraft or maybe like an FPV drone. None of this stuff is actually based on that practicality wise. Imagine doing one of these drone advanced tests right now with a person, oh, I'm going to fly my FPV drone here. It's not basically designed for that. It's designed for things like a DJI GPS based drone. So is this really about safety and so forth, or is it again just more about things like commercialization? And this one here actually says Tam actually started his own drone-based business last October called Send In The Drones, which is an aerial inspection, survey, and mapping services based in Abbotsford. He said he's worked with local construction companies and survey companies. He said he'd also like to work with local search and rescue groups and first responder city services such as the APD or Abbotsford Fire and Rescue Services. So there's kind of a conflict there in this opinion, because if you remember in the beginning of this article, it says, oh, initially he was so against it. It will basically ruin things like hobby drone flying. Now you run a business, so you're really for this. In my opinion, there's a conflict of interest here in terms of the way this is presented. So with that, when you think about it and you really sit down and analyze the details here, it doesn't make sense, because this article's foundation with the title would, I guess, convince more of a person who does not read drone news and stuff like that, like they're really uneducated, because this implies here that this guy was so against the rules when it was introduced in 2017. Now all of a sudden he's like, no, he agrees with it in every single way because of how dangerous drones are in general with the way people are flying it, like from what he observed. This would imply that back in 2017, nothing has changed. As it is right now, everything is still the same as it was. 9 kilometers away from airports, keep away from all buildings and animals. That's not how it is, but that's how this article comes across, I would imagine, for the average person when you read this. So it'd be like writing an article where someone way back then, like with those really old draconian laws for vehicles, you're saying, oh, back then I was so against it, but now modern day, jump like decades later or whatever, now they're so in support of it. The rules are nothing like that anymore. If we had draconian laws like that for vehicles or whatever, people would be outraged about that. Imagine still having like drone laws or whatever the way it was here. But that raises the point too. I mean, if you're basing this on facts, why don't you look at all the pre-2017 incidents or whatever? People flew this stuff all the time, and drones aren't just, quote, DJI drones. You have to look at everything that this thing regulates. Things like those model aircrafts, even things like FPV drones. List me all the deaths, for example, all the accidents that were caused because of it. I would argue, just with all the stories that you read every single day, like the one yesterday, you stop people's lives from being saved and all that. And you can't tell me it works if this is based on fact, because even in this article, it talks about the RCMP crashing their drone into a helicopter. You have a real tangible fact there that actually happened during this whole process. And then the other point that actually really got me thinking is because like here it implies, oh, this guy here, he fully agrees with it now, because it says here, quote, I was shocked to learn how recklessly people operated their drones, and I now support and encourage getting an education on how to properly use your drone. And basically he's saying, oh, he's an advanced pilot and all that. To that, I would say, in my personal opinion, just from personal observation, I've noticed that a lot of people who say drones are dangerous and all that, they don't really mean it's dangerous in a sense of it's going to kill someone, like 99% odds of doing so. It seems like people do it more as a way to control their own territory or out of jealousy. Like I even said before, you have to distinguish two categories. One, you can say the person is breaking the quote law because that's the way it's written. And the other category is it truly that dangerous? One example, if you're flying in your backyard, let's just say 5 meters off the ground in a controlled airspace, you can tell me that's quote illegal with the way it is, assuming it's over 250 grams. But to say that is dangerous because all of a sudden it's going to hit an airplane, that's a little far-fetched. And the other great example, which I think is the most intriguing one to think about, which people actually usually never have a response to it afterwards. Here, for example, people would say, oh, you can't fly the drone over people, it's too dangerous. What happens if it malfunctions? It can drop, smash on someone, kill them. I mean, it sounds horrible, right? I mean, it makes sense. But if you think about it, with how people fearmonger it so much, I even said, ironically, like this person here, most likely they only fly things maybe like a DJI drone most of the time. Check out where your drone's actually made. See how it's like in their area with drone regulations and all that. Flying over the drone over people and stuff like that is perfectly normal in various places. So if this is about fact, then why aren't hundreds of thousands of people dying over there? Why are they the most advanced, I guess you could say, country in making things like drone? Yet here, we're relying on things like their technology and all that. Because as it would seem, most people don't fly it that way. They don't fly it in stupid ways. They don't want to lose their what, $1,000 to $2,000 drone. Who wants the liability of potentially hurting someone and all that? But to say immediately, oh, it's going to kill someone or whatever, so it justifies these regulations, that makes absolutely no sense when you base it all on facts. There has to be a clear distinction. What is, quote, breaking the law in terms of the way it's written versus what is, quote, extremely dangerous when you factor everything in, common sense wise, probability of it happening, because you can't just say, oh, you can't even risk 1% chance. If that's the case, no one should be able to use, for example, a knife in their house. Even if you're just using it for dinner, just to cut food or whatever, you shouldn't be allowed to use it because someone could use it to stab someone. We don't live that way. Look how unproductive, I guess you could say, the whole world could be if we were that draconian with the laws. To many people like that too, I would say, stop thinking about just yourself in the sense of not everyone, again, flies a DJI drone. You have to think of everything that this regulation affects. Even if someone's flying, for example, a model aircraft, they should be able to do that without them being tied onto some crazy restriction when they're just flying below tree lines and all that. It's kind of sad to think about too. Why is it that a person like me who doesn't fly things like FPV or model aircraft, I care about people's rights in that way? I mean, sadly, it makes me think that many people who promote over-the-top regulations only think about themselves based on what they fly, as opposed to looking at the whole picture, who it affects. I mean, in many ways, it does remind me of things like just racism and discrimination. It's no difference in many ways than people who say, oh, who cares if people of this certain color, background, or whatever are being discriminated against? I don't care, because it doesn't affect me. I'm still making money or whatever in my business. I mean, to me, that's how selfish it is in many ways when I read stuff like this. If anything, I think that's what people should be embarrassed about. If they're only thinking about themselves in terms of things like these regulations and all that, shouldn't that be the more embarrassing thing, where they're culturally ignorant in terms of who's being affected overall with things like these regulations? And yes, Transport Canada has been investigated for things like racism, to my knowledge, which I'm not personally surprised, as I mentioned, because to have the same type of mentality and direction to create, I guess you could say, regulations that are fundamentally prejudiced and discriminating against specific groups of people, I'm not surprised. If you actually want to focus on safety, then make everything actually revolve around safety, not on commercialization, selling useless courses, in my opinion, where if it's based on facts, RCMP crashing drones to the helicopter, it doesn't work. It just basically makes people money. there's no flying today. I guess it's time for the archive. Alright, see you guys later.